Hello, and welcome to the Guitar Crusade, a podcast for the everyday guitarist. My name is Kurt, owner and instructor at Axtreme-Guitar.com and the YouTube channel Axtreme-Guitar. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the most fundamental concepts in guitar playing, chord progressions. Whether you're just starting out or you've been playing for a while, understanding chord progressions is key to being able to write your own music and play along with other musicians. So, let's get started. First, let's define what a chord progression actually is so we're all on the same page. If you do a simple search, like a Google search or something, then it will tell you a chord progression is simply a series of chords played in a specific order. These chords can come from different keys and different modes, but when put together in a certain way, they can create a sense of movement and structure in a song. Now that we have our definition of a chord progression, let's check out an example. One of the basic chord progressions is the 1-4-5 progression, which is also known as the 12-bar blues progression. If you ever want to do a Google search on a progression like the 1-4-5 progression, for example, you're going to want to write it out in Roman numerals. Capitalized Roman numerals represent major and lowercase represent minor. This means capital I for the 1 chord in the 1-4-5, and then capital I and a capital V for the 4 chord, and capital V for the 5 chord. So this 1-4-5 progression is built around the root, 4th, and 5th chords of a major scale. For those of you not so familiar with basic theory, all this talk of root, 4th, and 5th is probably giving you a little bit of anxiety. So here's a brief overview to help. The notes of the C major scale are C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And then you can end on the C, that is a higher octave. So when we number each pitch of the major scale, you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then of course we're back to the 1 note, that is an octave higher. Yes, the C, even when an octave higher, is still referred to as the 1 note or root note. So with that in mind, in the key of C, the most basic chord progression being the 1-4-5 progression is C as the 1 note. The 4 note is F, because counting out the letters in alphabetical order from C, you have C, D, E, and then F. F is the 4th in the series. And then we have the 5th note in the key of C, which represents G. So in the key of C, the 1-4-5 progression is C major, F major, and G major. So let's just allow that to sink in for a bit before we take another dive. So I can grab my guitar and play the chords C, F, and G in that order any way I choose to, whether strumming them, arpeggiating them, palm muting them. It's all the same, 1-4-5 progression. Can I change the order? Yep, you can change the order, but that doesn't mean it's going to be the 1-4-5 progression. The chords work well together regardless of what order you're using them in. Specifically, the 1-4-5 in any key will work well together, but if you want to be working with the 1-4-5, it has to be in that order. And for this podcast, we're just going to be focusing on the key of C. So quick recap, we have the key of C major. We are looking at the 1-4-5 progression. We found our chords by taking the individual notes, C, which is the 1st note, which equals C major, F, which is the 4th note in the series, which is F major, and G, which is the 5th note in the series and represents G major. So far, so good. By this point, you may be wondering, how do I know which chords are major and which are minor? Well, the one gimme is that we are working in the key of C major. Notice my subtle emphasis there. If we're in the key of C major, then the root note, or 1 chord, is a major, or C major. Now, to understand how to determine the rest, just keep listening, we'll get to that. Now, you may be asking, what about a progression using the minor chords? Well, I have an example for that as well. But before we go any further, if you like this podcast, hit the like button and subscribe so you can check out more like it. Leave a comment, ask questions if you have any, and if there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future podcast, just let me know. So back to what we were talking about. Here is an example of another common progression, this time using a minor chord, and that is the 2-5-1 progression. This progression is popular in jazz and is built around the 2nd, 5th, and root chords of a major scale. So again, we'll use the key of C major, and the 2-5-1 progression is written as lowercase I, then capital V, and a capital I. Again, the 2 in the 2-5-1 progression refers to the 2nd note in the key of C major, which is a D note. And because the Roman numerals are lowercase, it represents the D minor chord. The capital V for the 5 chord is G major, just as it was in the previous progression, which was also in the key of C. Last we come to the 1 chord, or root, which is C major. So the 2-5-1 progression in the key of C major is D minor, G major, and C major. Quick side note here. In music, when you're talking about a major chord, often musicians just say the note or letter. What I mean is, if I were referring to, say, G major or C major, you might just hear me say G or C. I don't usually say G major or C major, although I can. When it's clear you're talking about chords, it's understood. You mean the major chord and not a single note. If the chord were anything else, like a major 7th chord, major 7 flat 5, or some other very complicated title, then it would be explicitly named that way. So back to the 2-5-1 progression, we have D minor, G, and C for a chord progression, and like the previous progression 1-4-5, you can play the 2-5-1 strumming, arpeggiating, you can go fast or slow, in that order, and it's still the same progression. Now let's look at determining the chord type. This is the part that you've been waiting for. How to know which chord is supposed to be major and which is minor when pulling from a major scale. That might be a bit confusing just from saying it that way. So let's go back to the C major scale, and we had C, D, E, F, G, A, B. Every major scale follows the exact same formula when making chords, which is very good for us. Takes a lot of the difficulty out of all of this. So before we go further, let's just look at it this way, and let's abbreviate major and minor, and we'll just use a capital M for major and a lowercase m for minor. The formula you want to memorize is, and you should probably write this down. Actually, no, you should definitely write this down. Type it out in your phone or on your computer, whatever you need to do. So we have capital M, then we have lowercase m, another lowercase m, then capital M again, another lowercase m, and then D-I-M, as in dim, and that stands for diminished. These need to be in the order that I just gave them to you. Then write out the notes to any scale, from the lowest pitch to the highest, and align them with those M's and dim that I just gave you. You can use the key of C for it, and what would end up happening is you would have C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and B diminished. Knowing this formula will absolutely help you and will be something you can use regularly. So when you're first starting out, it can be very helpful to practice these basic chord progressions we discussed, the 1-4-5 and the 2-5-1, in different keys, so you can get a feel for how they sound and how they can be used in different songs. For the more experienced players, you can also try experimenting with different inversions or voicings of the chords to add some variety and interest to your playing. So that's it for this episode of the Guitar Crusade. We covered a lot, so feel free to listen to this podcast more than once. I hope you found this information on chord progressions and determining types of chords of a key helpful. Remember, understanding chord progressions is a crucial part of being able to write and play your own music. So take the time to practice these basic progressions and experiment with them in different keys and voicings. If you ever have questions or feedback beyond commenting on a specific podcast, feel free to reach out to me using the web form at Axtreme-Guitar.com. That's Axtreme-Guitar.com. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next episode. Keep practicing and enjoy your guitar journey.